हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू द लाइव सेशन। तो आज हम देखेंगे एनसीईआरटी हिस्ट्री क्लास 8 का चैप्टर नंबर 3 जो कि है रूलिंग द कंट्री साइड। तो शुरू करते हैं हमारा आज का चैप्टर। द कंपनी बिकम्स द दीवान। On 12 August 1765, the Mughal Emperor appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal. The actual event most probably took place in Robert Cliff's tent with a few Englishmen and Indians as witnesses. But in the painting above, the event is shown as a majestic occasion taking place in a grand setting. The painter was commissioned by Cliff to record the memorable events in Cliff's life. The grant of Diwani clearly was one such events in British imagination. As Diwan, the company became the chief financial administrator of the territory under its control. Now it had to think of administrating the land and organizing its revenue resource. This had to be done in a way that could yield enough revenue to meet the growing expenses of the company. A trading company had also to ensure that it could buy the products it needed and sell what it wanted. Over the years, the company also learned that it had to move with some caution. Being an alien power, it needed to pacify those who in the past had ruled the countryside and enjoyed authority and prestige. Those who had held local powers had to be controlled, but they could not be entirely eliminated. How was this to be done? In this chapter, we will see how the company came to colonize the countryside, organize revenue resources, redefine the rights of people, and produce the crops it wanted. Revenue for the company. The company had become the Diwan, but it still saw itself primarily as a trader. It wanted a large revenue income but was unwilling to set up any regular system of assessment and collection. The effort was to increase the revenue as much as it could and buy the fine cotton and silk cloth as cheaply as possible. Within 5 years, the value of goods bought by the company in Bengal doubled. Before 1865, the company had purchased goods in India by importing gold and silver from Britain. Now, the revenue collected in Bengal could finance the purchase of goods for export. Soon it was clear that the Bengal economy was facing a deep crisis. Artisans were deserting villages since they were being forced to sell their goods to the company at low prices. Peasants were unable to pay dues that were being demanded from them. Artisanal production was in decline, and agricultural cultivation showed signs of collapse. Then, in 1770, a terrible famine killed 10 million people in Bengal. About one third of the population was wiped out. The need to improve agriculture. If the economy was in ruins, could the company be certain of its revenue income? Most company officials began to feel that investment in land had to be encouraged and agriculture had to be improved. How was this to be done? After 2 decades of debate on the question, the company finally introduced the permanent settlement in 1793. By the terms of the settlement, the Rajas and Talukdars were recognized as Jamindars. They were asked to collect rent from the peasants and pay revenue to the company. The amount to be paid was fixed permanently, that is, it was not to be increased ever in future. It was felt that this would ensure a regular flow of revenue into the company's coffers and at the same time encourage the zamindars to invest in improving the land. Since the revenue demand of the state would not be increased, the zamindar would benefit from increased production from the land. The problem. The permanent settlement, however, created problems. Company officials soon discovered that the zamindars were in fact not investing in the improvement of land. The revenue that had been fixed was so high that the zamindars found it difficult to pay. Anyone who failed to pay the revenue lost his zamindari. Numerous zamindaris were sold off at auctions organized by the company. By the first decade of the 19th century, the situation changed. The prices in the market rose and cultivation slowly expanded. This meant an increase in income of the zamindars, but no gain for the company since it could not increase the revenue demand that had been fixed permanently. Even then, the zamindars did not have an interest in improving the land. Some had lost their lands in the earlier years of the settlement. Others now saw the possibility of earning without the trouble and risk of investment. As long as the zamindars could give out the land to tenants and get rent, they were not interested in improving the land. Coal broke on Bengal riots. In many villages of the Bengal, some of the powerful riots did not cultivate but instead gave out their lands to others, the under tenants, taking from them very high rents. In 1806, S.T. Colebrook described the conditions of these undertenants in Bengal. The undertenants, depressed by an excessive rent in kind and by usurious rent returns for the cattle, seed, and subsistence advanced to them, can never extricate themselves from debt. In so abject a state, they cannot labor in spirit, while they earn a scanty subsistence without hope of bettering their situation. On the other hand, in the villages, the cultivator found the system extremely oppressive. The rent he paid to the zamindar was high, and his right to the land on the land was insecure. To pay the rent, he had to often take a loan from the moneylender, and when he failed to pay the rent, he was evicted from the land he had cultivated for generations. A new system is devised. By the early 19th century, many of the company officials were convinced that the system of revenue had to be changed again. How could revenues be fixed permanently at a time when the company needed more money to meet its expenses of administration and trade? In the northwestern provinces of the Bengal presidencies, this area is now in Uttar Pradesh. An Englishman called Holt Mackenzie devised the new system which came into effect in 1822. He felt that the village was an important social institution in North Indian society and needed to be preserved. Under his direction, collectors went from village to village, inspecting the land, measuring the fields, and recording the customs and rights of different groups. The estimated revenue of each plot within a village was added up to calculate the revenue that each village mahal had to pay. In British revenue records, mahal is a revenue estate which may be a village or a group of villages. This demand was to be revised periodically, not permanently fixed. The charge of collecting the revenue and paying it to the company was given to the village headman rather than the jamindar. This system came to be known as Mahalwari settlement. The Monroe system. In the British territories in the south, there was a similar move away from the idea of permanent settlements. The new system that was devised came to be known as the Rayatwar or Rayatwari. It was tried on a small scale by Captain Alexander Reed in some of the areas that were taken over by the company after the wars with Tipu Sultan, subsequently developed by Thomas Monroe. This system was gradually extended all over South India. Reed and Monroe felt that in South there were no traditional zamindars. The settlement, they argued, had to be made directly with the cultivators ryots who had tilled the land for generations. Their fields had to be carefully and separately surveyed before the revenue assessment was made. Monroe thought that the British should act as paternal father figures protecting the riots under their charge. All was not well. Within a few years after the new systems were imposed, it was clear that all was not well with them. Driven by the desire to increase the income from land, revenue officials faced too high a revenue demand. Peasants were unable to pay, riots fled the countryside, and villages became deserted in many regions. Optimistic officials had imagined that the new system would transform the peasants into rich, enterprising farms, but this did not happen. Crops for Europe. The British also realized that the countryside could not only yield revenue, it also it could also grow the crops that Europe required. By the late 18th century, the company was trying its best to expand the cultivation of opium and indigo. In the century and in the century and a half that followed, the British persuaded or forced cultivators in various parts of India to produce other crops: jute in Bengal, tea in Assam, sugarcane in the United Province now Uttar Pradesh, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra and Punjab, rice in Madras. How was this done? The British used a variety of methods to expand the cultivation of crops that they needed. Let us take a closer look at the story of one such crop, one such method of production. Does color have a history? Figure 5 and 6 are two images of cotton prints. The image on the left shows a kalamkari print created by weavers of Andhra Pradesh in India. On the right is a floral cotton print designed and produced by William Morris, a famous poet and artist of the 19th century Britain. There is one thing common in the two prints. Both use a rich blue color, commonly called indigo. Do you know how this color was produced? The blue that you see in these prints was produced from a plant called indigo. It is likely that the blue dye used in the Morris prints in the 19th century Britain was manufactured from indigo plants cultivated in India, for India was the biggest supplier of indigo in the world at the time. Why the demand for Indian indigo? The indigo plant grows primarily in the tropics. By the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by cloth manufacturers in Italy, France, and Britain to dye cloth. However, only small amounts of Indian indigo reached the European market, and its price was very high. European cloth manufacturers therefore had to depend on another plant called woad to make violet and blue dyes. Being a plant of the temperate zones, was more easily available in Europe. It was grown in northern Italy, southern France, and in parts of Germany and Britain. Worried by the competition from indigo, wood producers in Europe pressurized their governments to ban the import of indigo. Cloth dyers, however, preferred indigo as a dye. Indigo produced a rich blue color, whereas the dye from wood was pale and dull. By the 17th century, European cloth producers persuaded their governments to relax the ban on indigo import. The French began cultivating indigo in Saint Domingue in the Caribbean islands, the Portuguese in Brazil, the English in Jamaica, and the Spanish in Venezuela. Indigo plantations also came up in many parts of North America. Plantation, a large farm operated by a planter employing various forms of forced labor. Plantations are associated with the production of coffee, sugarcane, tobacco, tea, and cotton. By the end of the 18th century, the demand for Indian indigo grew further. Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded dramatically, creating an enormous new demand for cloth dyes. While the demand for indigo increased, its existing supplies from the West Indies and America collapsed for a variety of reasons. Between 1783 and 1789, the production of indigo in the world fell by half. Cloth dyers in Britain now desperately look for new sources of indigo supply. From where could this indigo be procured? Britain turns to India. Faced with the rising demand for indigo in Europe, the company in India looked for ways to expand the area under indigo cultivation. From the last decades of the 18th century, indigo cultivators in Bengal expanded rapidly and Bengal indigo came to dominate the world market. In 1788, only about 30% of the indigo imported into Britain was from India. By 1810, the proportion had gone up to 95%. As the indigo trade grew, commercial agents and officials of the company began investing in indigo production. Over the years, many company officials left their jobs to look after their indigo business. Attracted by the prospect of high profits, numerous Scotsmen and Englishmen came to India and became planters. Those who had no money to produce indigo could get loans from the company and the banks that were coming up at the time. In the 18th century, French planters produced indigo and sugar in the French colony of Saint Domingue and the Caribbean islands. The African slaves who worked on the plantations rose in rebellion in 1791, burning the plantations and killing the rich planters. In 1792, France abolished slavery in the French colonies. These events led to the collapse of the indigo plantation on the Caribbean islands. Slave, a person who is owned by someone else, the slave owner. A slave has no freedom and is compelled to work for the master. How was indigo cultivated? There were two main systems of indigo cultivation, niche and ryote. Within the system of niche cultivation, the planter produced indigo in lands that he directly controlled. He either bought the land or rented it from other zamindars and produced indigo by directly employing hired laborers. The problem with niche cultivators. The planters found it difficult to expand the area under niche cultivation. Indigo could be cultivated only on fertile lands, and these were already densely populated. Only small plots scattered over the landscape could be acquired. Planters needed large areas in compact blocks to cultivate indigo in plantations. Where could they get such land from? They attempted to lease in the land around the indigo factory and evict the peasants from the area, but this always led to conflicts and tension. Nor was labor easy to mobilize. A large plantation required a vast number of hands to operate, and labor was needed precisely at a time when peasants were usually busy with their rice cultivation. Niche cultivation on a large scale also required many plugs and bullocks. Only bigha of indigo cultivation required 2 plugs. Bigha, a unit of measurement of land. Before British rule, the size of this area varied. In Bengal, the British standardized it to about one-third of an acre. This meant that a planter with 1000 bighas would need 2000 plugs. Investing on purchase and maintenance of plugs was a big problem. Nor could supplies be easily got from the peasants, since their plugs and bullocks were busy on their rice fields, again exactly at the time that the indigo planters needed them. Till the late 19th century, planters were therefore reluctant to expand the area under niche cultivation. Less than 25% of the land producing indigo was under this system. The rest was under an alternative mode of cultivation, the Rioti system. Indigo on the land of riots. Under the Rioti system, the planters forced the riots to sign a contract, an agreement, satta at times. They pressurized the village headmen to sign the contract on behalf of the riots. Those who signed the contract got cash advances from the planters at low rates of interest to produce indigo, but the loan committed the riot to cultivating indigo on at least 25% of the area under his holding. The planter provided the seed and the drill, while the cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seed, and looked after the crop. How was indigo produced? The indigo villages were usually around indigo factories owned by planters. After harvest, the indigo plant was taken to the butts in the indigo factory. 3 or 4 butts were needed to manufacture the dye. Each butt had a separate function. The leaves stripped of the indigo plant were first soaked in warm water in a vat known as the fermenting or steeper vat for several hours. When the plants fermented, the liquid began to boil and bubble. Now the rotten leaves were taken out and the liquid drained into another vat that was placed just below the first vat. In the second vat, known as the bitter vat, the solution was continuously stirred and beaten with pedals. When the liquid gradually turned green and then blue, lime water was added to the vat. Gradually, the indigo separated out in flakes. A muddy sediment settled at the bottom of the vat and a clear liquid rose to the surface. The liquid was drained off and the sediment, the indigo pulp, transferred to another vat known as the settling vat and then pressed and dried for sale. The indigo worker here is standing with the pedal that was used to stir the solution in the vat. These workers had to remain in waist deep water for over 8 hours to beat the indigo solution. But a fermenting or storage vessel. Here you can see the last stage of the production. Workers stamping and cutting the indigo pulp that has been pressed and molded. In the background you can see a worker carrying away the blocks for drying. When the crop was delivered to the planter after the harvest, a new loan was given to the riot and the cycle started all over again. Pigeons who were initially tempted by the loans soon realized how harsh the system was. The price they got from indigo they produced was very low and the cycle of loans never ended. There were other problems too. The planters usually insisted that indigo be cultivated on the wet soils in which pigeons preferred to cultivate rice. Indigo, moreover, had deep roots and it exhausted the soils rapidly. After an indigo harvest, the land could not be sown with rice. The Blue Rebellion and after. In March 1859, thousands of riots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. As the rebellion spread, riots refused to pay rents to the planters and attacked indigo factories, armed with swords and spears, bows and arrows. Women turned out to fight with pots, pans, and kitchen implements. Those who worked for the planters were all socially boycotted, and the Gomthas, agents of planters who came to collect rents, were beaten up. Riots swore they would no longer take advances to sow indigo, nor be bullied by the planters' lathials, the lathi-wielding strongmen maintained by the planters. Why did the indigo peasant decide that they would no longer remain silent? What gave them the power to rebel? Clearly, the indigo system was intensely oppressive, but those who are oppressed do not always rise up in rebellion. They do so only at times. In 1859, the Indigo riots felt that they had the support of the local zamindars and village headmen in their rebellion against the planters. In many villages, headmen who had been forced to sign indigo contracts mobilized the indigo peasants and fought pitched battles with the lathials. In other places, even the zamindars went around villages urging the riots to resist the planters. These zamindars were unhappy with the increasing power of the planters and angry at being forced by the planters to give them land on long leases. The indigo peasants also imagined that the British government would support them in their struggle against the planters. After the revolt of 1857, the British government was particularly worried about the possibility of another popular rebellion. When the news spread of a simmering revolt in the indigo districts, the lieutenant governor toured the region in the winter of 1859. The riots saw the tour as a sign of government sympathy for their plight. When in Barsat, the magistrate Ashley Eden issued a notice stating that riots would not be compelled to accept indigo contracts. Word went around that Queen Victoria had declared that indigo need not be sown. Eden was trying to placate the peasants and control an explosive situation, but his action was read as support for the rebellion. A song from an indigo producing village. In moments of struggle, people often sing songs to inspire each other and to build a sense of collective unity. Such songs give us a glimpse of their feelings. During the Indigo Rebellion, many such songs could be heard in the villages of Lower Bengal. Here is one such song. The long lathis wielded by the planter of Mohalati now lie in a cluster. The Babus of Kolkata have sailed down to see the great fight. This time the riots are all ready. They will no longer be beaten in silence. They will no longer give up their life without fighting the Lathials. As the rebellion spread, intellectuals from Kolkata rushed to the indigo districts. They wrote of the misery of the riots, the tyranny of the planters, and the horrors of the indigo system. Worried by the rebellion, the government brought in the military to protect the planters from assault and set up the Indigo Commission to inquire into the system of indigo production. The commission held the planters guilty and criticized them for the coercive methods they used with indigo cultivators. It declared that indigo production was not profitable for riders. The commission asked the riders to fulfill their existing contracts but also told them that they could refuse to produce indigo in future. I would rather beg than sow indigo. Haji Mullah, an indigo cultivator of Chandpur Thana, Hardi, was interviewed by the members of the Indigo Commission on Tuesday, 5 June 1860. This is what he said in answer to some of the questions. W. S. Satonkar, president of the Indigo Commission, are you now willing to sow indigo? And if not, on what fresh terms would you be willing to do it? Haji Mullah, I am not willing to sow, and I don't know that any fresh terms would satisfy me. Mr. Sale, would you not be willing to sow at a rupee a bundle? Haji Mullah, no, I would not. Rather than sow indigo, I will go to another country. I would rather beg than sow indigo. After the revolt, indigo production collapsed in Bengal, but the planters now shifted their operation to Bihar. With the discovery of synthetic dyes in the late 19th century, their business was severely affected. But yet they managed to expand production. When Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa, a peasant from Bihar persuaded him to visit Champaran and see the plight of the indigo cultivators there. Mahatma Gandhi's visit in 1917 marked the beginning of the Champaran movement against the indigo planters. Elsewhere, indigo making in the West Indies. In the early 18th century, a French missionary, Jean Baptiste Lebert, traveled to the Caribbean islands and wrote extensively about the region. Published in one of his books, this image shows all the stages of indigo production in French slave plantations of the regions. You can see the slave workers putting the indigo plant into the settler vat on the left. Another worker is churning the liquid with a mechanical churner in a vat, second from right. Two workers are carrying the indigo pulp hung up in bags to be dried. In the foreground, two others are mixing the indigo pulp to be put into molds. The planter is at the center of the picture, standing on the high ground supervising the slave workers. तो इसी के साथ हमारा आज का चैप्टर ख़त्म होता है और ये है इस चैप्टर का एक्सरसाइज। तो अगर आप चैनल पे न्यू हैं तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर दीजिए और नोटिफिकेशन आइकन पर क्लिक कर दीजिए ताकि आप डेली लाइव क्लास ज्वाइन कर सकें। और अगर आपको वीडियो अच्छा लगे तो लाइक कर दीजिए। तो हमारा आज का सेशन यहीं तक था। थैंक्स फॉर ज्वाइनिंग।